Everyone. During the openings, MCs announced that one of the themes of this conference is going to be focused on building resilience. Congratulations to everybody. You are here for the last session and you already have demonstrated that you're on the right way to build your resilience. The topic of our next panel is by no means light. We're going to be talking about strengthening deterrence capabilities in the 21st century. We have a full-scale war right at our doorsteps. NATO allies definitely would prefer to deter wars rather than fight them. Earlier today, Secretary Esper estimated that we're going to be facing decades of confrontation with Russia. And the question that we're all legitimately asking is, are we doing deterrence right? And how we can be doing it effectively? To answer this question, I would like to welcome on stage the fantastic speakers that we have with us today. We're having with us today Martin Sklenár, who is the Minister of Defense of the Slovak Republic, Hanno Pevkur, Minister of Defense of the Republic of Estonia, Camille, Distinguished Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, and Thomas Kauffmann, Vice President for International Business and Services at the General Dynamics European Land Systems. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
By now, I think everybody in the audience already knows the rules of the game. We're going to start with a quick exchange with the panelists, and then you're all welcome to ask questions either by raising your hand here and waving at me, or asking the questions on Slido in the online GLOBSEC app. I will start by quickly summarizing what we all understand by deterrence, but please do feel free to correct me later in your interventions. Deterrence traditionally means having the capabilities to inflict pain and having the will to use them, forcing the potential opponent to calculate that they will not achieve their military goals, so they're not likely to attack at all. So today we're going to try to unpack whether we have the right capabilities and whether we have the will to use them. But to start us off, Minister Sklenár, I'm going to go to you first. There's several groups of arguments that can be made about deterrence today. One group of people would say that our deterrence is not deterring much these days, and another group would say that actually NATO didn't even try to deter the war in their neighborhood. I don't think that either answer is particularly comfortable, but I want to ask you, do you think the deterrence is working or not right now, and how has your thinking about deterrence changed with the war in Ukraine?
Thank you, and a good afternoon to everybody. The simple answer is deterrence works. I mean, here we are. We're in Bratislava, enjoying a nice conference under the umbrella of deterrence. And it's, for me, it's as simple as this. And for Slovaks, it has been a privilege to benefit from deterrence that works, or has been working for the whole time that NATO has been actually an organization. And for me, it's very simple also to demonstrate that, because here we are under the deterrence umbrella, but in other countries like Moldova or Ukraine or Belarus, those countries cannot benefit from that deterrence that NATO provides. And the most important piece of deterrence is the calculation that you also mentioned. This is clearly working in our favor. We have the strength, we have the willingness or the resolve to use the capabilities, and it's seen. And NATO is regarded as a strong organization that is able to provide for the security of its members. And that's the basic question, and it's not disputed by anybody. If anybody wants to have a discussion about that, here we are united, we are strong, and we are showing this to the world. Sometimes people forget about that, that this is actually the situation, but for me, it's simple.
Minister Pevkur, moving next to you. Are you comfortable with how we have been doing our deterrence? And if you had to ask for more, what would be your key request how to strengthen our deterrence right now?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I had a very good meeting today bilaterally also with Martin, and definitely small countries like Estonia and Slovakia, we all understand what for we need deterrence. And the main understanding is very simple, that you have to give your enemy understanding or let him know that please, or not please, just even don't think about to do anything. So we are not pleasing anyone. So, but and in that sense, we have done a lot, especially in the eastern flank countries. When I take also Estonia, we are putting this year 2.8 to our defense, next year 3.2. And this is exactly what we need to do. So when we are asking that what we need to do more, first answer is put more money. Because 2014, NATO countries agreed in Wales that we will have in 10 years at least 2%. Today we have still only 9 countries who have 2%. And next year will be summit in Washington, D.C. 10 years are passing since Wales, and still we don't have 2%. So this is, the first goal that everybody needs to understand why we need, because, the freedom has no price. And then when you think about that the freedom has no price, then 2% is not too much. So this is the first goal. Secondly, of course, we have to understand that the deterrence means that it has to work also in practical means. When the Secretary General Cavoli brings out the new regional plans, these will be adopted or approved latest by Vilnius, then these plans have to be executable by the end of the year. Otherwise, we can say that yes, we have perfect plans on the paper, but they are not executable. And when these plans are not executable, then we don't have the deterrence. So all the countries have to put the forces inside to or determine or allocate the forces, and then we can start to test, are these forces enough for these plans what SECURE has foreseen? But probably I can continue for the next hour, and then the other ones can not have enough time for this.
Can you give us a brief yes or no, maybe? Do we have enough forces to execute the plans?
We have enough forces when everybody will also allocate these forces. I'm more than sure that collectively inside of NATO, we have enough power to deter Russia, and Russia knows that. Now it's about the political willingness also to say that, yes, these forces are also allocated for the common sake. So this is the point, that it cannot be so that, because when the front door is open, then you cannot feel safe also in Germany, because when the eastern flank is open, so when Russia can step into Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Slovak Republic, etc., so to the eastern flank, and then we say that okay, the deterrence didn't work. Deterrence works only then when we don't see Russian boots on Estonian ground. Then deterrence works.
Thank you so much for that. And with that, I want to move to Camille. Camille, you worked a lot on nuclear deterrence, and this is a very interesting part of the conversation right now. Traditionally, at least the majority of people were thinking that nuclear deterrence is there to avoid wars. Others would be saying that, yes, it avoids nuclear war, but still countries would be using conventional capabilities. But what's interesting with the war in Ukraine is that nuclear capabilities seem to be a reason why we're also self-deterring ourselves. What is your thinking on the nuclear deterrence right now?
Well, to start from the broader conversation, what is absolutely clear is that we failed collectively to deter Russia from attacking Ukraine. So the threat of sanctions, the threat of isolation did not suffice to convince Russia that they should not attack Ukraine. So that is not a NATO failure, that is a collective Western failure. We could not convince the Russians not to go down that route. Couldn't do it in 2014, couldn't do it in 2022. The reality, what is interesting when it comes to nuclear deterrence, is we talk a lot about us being deterred from supporting Ukraine, especially on the ground. And obviously, NATO has not chosen, for instance, to implement a no-fly zone or to send boots on the ground in Ukraine there. What we are missing, I think, is the better part of the equation, which is the fact that NATO's nuclear deterrence and deterrence provided by the 3 NATO nuclear weapon states does deter Russia from expanding the conflict to NATO. And there I'm with the ministers on saying deterrence does work very well vis-à-vis Russia in this conflict, because Russia has not been even testing the possibility of expanding the conflict to NATO territory, and that's a success. And even more so, I would argue that our ability to support Ukraine is very much ingrained in our own nuclear deterrent capability, because in a way, imagine for a second, if, let's say, Iran had created a gigantic logistical hub across the border from Iraq, and America would have sat on its hands looking at that and saying, okay, that's fine, you're delivering weapons, we complain about it, we say it's a bad idea, but we don't do much about it. So from this perspective, we do have a very, very robust deterrent vis-à-vis Russia. So we are in a situation where there is a sort of cross-deterrence. That, yes, Russia has, in a way, deterring through veiled or unveiled nuclear threats from a direct engagement in the conflict. But its nuclear weapons are pretty useless in fighting the Ukrainians. On the other hand, our own nuclear deterrent enables us to be supporting Ukraine to an extent which many would not have bet on, precisely because we are comfortable with this, and we know that Russia will not be escalating this conflict, or at least we create the conditions for Russia not to escalate this conflict, and not even to counter or massive assistance to Ukraine, which I think is a great success from our deterrence, both conventional and nuclear in many ways.
Thanks so much. Thomas, moving next to you. We talked a lot about the need of strengthening deterrence. Part of the deterrence actually is to make sure that Ukraine wins the war. All that means that countries in the region, in Europe, but also beyond, at least say that they're investing more into capabilities. Do you feel this pledge being trickling down into the actual procurement processes and the contracts that you are receiving from the governments?
Well, that's a very concrete question, but before I come to this, one comment on deterrence. Deterrence is quite simple. It's detect the threat, decide and act. And first, we need to see whether on NATO level that we have enough technology that we can detect a threat very early. The second question is about the political willingness to decide, and all NATO members need to decide on the same action we then take. And if we then act, means we assemble military forces. The question is, can they fight with each other? And can we bring these forces in time to the relevant place? And everything is about speed. Only if we're very much fast and speedy in terms of detecting a threat very early. Ukraine, 2014, we missed that. So that's why deterrence did not work. The fact how quickly we can then act, I would say today we are much faster in a political decision-making process. But the question to me remains whether when it comes to the point, can we act fast? And here's one element, if I look at our European terrain, especially when I look at Estonia and the other countries, where you see at the moment you're at the forefront, the first defense line. Are we able to bring our military forces fast enough to the places where we need them? And that's about military mobility. So are we acting very fast when it comes to acquisition? Yeah, I think I see a lot of initiatives going on at the moment. We are going to buy vehicles. We talk about defense spendings. The question is, do we have the right forces for this? Are they deployable in the new scenario? And is this a sustainable effort we have to take? And I mean, deterrence means at the end of the day, we are running into a new Cold War. And we have to be fast also in 2, 3, 4, 5 years and remain agile. So that's the critical path I see.
I want to follow up. I want the ministers to follow up on what you're saying right now. The question there was, do we have the correct type of forces and can we move them fast enough? Minister Sklenár, what would be your answer to that?
Yes, I think Hanno already mentioned it. We do have the forces. We do have the credible force that we need to provide deterrence for everybody. We need to work on the mobility to be able to deploy them even quicker than we are already able to do that, and act as quickly. I think the NATO term is at the speed of relevance. Otherwise, I mean, you can have forces, but if you move them too late, well, it's too late. So, but we have the forces, we have the mobility, we are exercising that, we are showing to the world, to the enemies and adversaries that we are able to do that. We know what the problems are, we need to have a plan, we will have a plan, we will have several plans in NATO, how to increase even further, strengthen the eastern flank. So the answer is yes, we have the forces and the way to deploy them.
Camille, are you trying to jump in on this point?
Yeah, I think first of all, the good news. NATO has achieved tremendous progress compared to where we were in 2016. I worked at NATO from 2016 to 22. We've done a lot of progress in terms of planning, in terms of readiness, in terms of training, in terms of exercising the forces, in terms of developing the budget. But this is a sustained effort, and it needs to be sustained over time. Because essentially, the last 5-10 years has been about restoring a sort of minimum level of readiness and of capability that had been, let's be honest, forces had become quite hollow in many corners of the alliance. So, and issues such as military mobility, a level of investment, and so on were not good signs there. So we've really turned a corner, and we're in a much better position than we were even 5 years ago. Having said this, this effort needs to be sustained. We need to do essentially 3 things to meet and to make sure that this deterrence is solid, continue to invest over time, and I couldn't agree more with the Minister on the 2% and probably beyond that, and in the next decade, not in the next year. That is really important. The second thing is to invest in some mass, let's put it bluntly, which was not the guidance given by NATO in the age of interventions overseas. So reinvent a bit of mass to be able to face some contingencies that are a major conventional war in Europe. And thirdly, do have the plans and the capabilities to move around troops, to reinforce when needed, when the crisis arises, in order to be able to make sure that the very robust NATO deterrent is credible on day one, not after 3 weeks, because we've seen in Ukraine what can happen after 3 weeks. The Ukrainians have done a superb job, but none of us want parts of NATO territory to be occupied even for a few weeks.
Minister Pevkur.
Yes, so we're speaking about the mobility, and when we think actually the reality, what we have to face, then first we need prepositioned ammunition and equipment to the frontline countries. Once again, when we have this, then our biggest threat, which is Russia, has the clear understanding that hey, come on, I will not go there. Secondly, the forces. Yes, we have to have the forces, but also, that regarding the mobility, I believe that, in reality, we will face a situation on the political level, not on the military level. All the military staff officers or the generals who are responsible for the military operation will say immediately what has to be done in this very moment when the threat is imminent. And in that sense, I believe that what we need to do inside of NATO, that when we have the common understanding that Article 5 works, and it has to be engaged, and the regional plans are in place, then the SACEUR's office or the SACEUR itself has to have the authority to engage the preliminary actions, because otherwise we will be too slow. Otherwise, when we have to sit somewhere in Brussels, 32 countries, when Sweden will join soon, and make a decision, do we engage Article 5 or not, then by that time, sorry to say, Russian army will be already on the halfway to Tallinn. And we don't have the time. We don't have the strategic depth. I said that many times, but when you look at the map of Ukraine, then it seems that it's a small part of Ukraine which has been occupied at the moment. In reality, this is the size of Estonia, Latvia, and half of Lithuania, or Estonia, Netherlands, and Denmark. So this is the size which has been occupied at the moment. So we don't have the strategic depth. So this is why we need to have forces in place where they are also used. We need pre-positioned ammunition, and we need authorization for the SACEUR's office or the SACEUR to engage if necessary. And then we can say that we have credible deterrence, and then we can say that yes, this what is on the plans, in the regional plans, also works and actually deters Russia.
Thomas, I'm going to go back to you because we started talking about mobility, but also one of the common arguments that is commonly voiced these days is that with all the provisions of weapons that we need also provide to Ukraine, but also to backfill our own capabilities, our own industries are not coping. We need to scale fast. What would be your requests how we can speed up this process and what it means also for our supply chains?
Well, first of all, I think we have still rotational forces in NATO. That means we don't have permanent forces. As you said, we need to put ammunition forward on a permanent base to use it. But as long as we are rotating, that means troops have to move from A to B of a very tremendous distance, 2,000 kilometers at least. And for instance, we do not have a kind of a military Schengen. We can easier transport goods in a commercial truck from Frankfurt to Tallinn than if I would ask a company commander to take his military convoy and go from Frankfurt to Tallinn, because he has to stop at all borders. We have to do a lot of paperwork. We have a lot of traffic. We have a lot of infrastructure. We cannot ignore that we have limited capacity on our bridges. We have to look at the infrastructure, railroad, road capacities. And I think this gives the military quite a tremendous challenge. And here we need to give them an answer, not only procedural to facilitate and simplify cross-border operations, but also to make sure we have enough bridging capabilities. At the moment, we see a great demand on bridge systems for our forces. We can have the greatest main battle tank in the world, but if I cannot bring him into the battlefield, I cannot work and fight with it. So you mentioned supply chain in what concrete sense?
I think you already covered a lot of this question, so we'll follow up on that later. But I want to bring in a couple of questions that we have on slide, and please do let me know if somebody in the audience would like to ask a question, and I'll make sure that I'll bring you in. I will start with a question that puts deterrence a little bit in the broader context. Of course, we're talking now about deterrent Russia because that's the immediate threat, and we're right here in the neighborhood. Can we put it in a bit of a broader, maybe even global context, whether our thinking about deterrence has changed? Of course, China has come up a lot in the context of NATO conversations, but potentially it's a little bit different type of the discussion. How does non-Russia issues feature into your thinking about deterrence here? And Minister Sklenár probably will go to you with this question.
Yes, that's a very good question, and certainly it has changed. I mean, this is the situation as we see now. Teaches us a lot. I mean, the lessons that we see. It's not only about what we have discussed, right? The strength and the sustainability, the enablement of the forces and their presence and the plans and everything. But it's also about other things, and it's about things how much ammunition you need for a day or a month of a fight. How long can you sustain this? What do you do with your cyberspace? How are you resilient, or how can you deter attacks in either cyberspace or in the information space even? I mean, this is everything that adds to the complex situation where you need to be ready, where you need to present yourself as an adversary to an adversary as somebody who is able to withstand the attack, who is able to increase the costs in all these areas. And in some it's very difficult. In the information space, cyberspace, those attacks are very efficient and they are cheap. So how do you increase the costs there? I mean, that's obviously I have no magic answers to this question, but this is something that you need to take into account if you think about deterrence. That's on the problem part. And well, with new areas and domains, there's new actors that come into play, right? I mean, private companies, individuals, what have you. I mean, with plausible deniability, it could be basically anybody who's trying to attack you. But also with that come also good possibilities, because then you can use some other ways of dealing with it. And here you can use, as part of your deterrence, you can use things like attribution, or basically, highlighting what is going on as a way of deterring at least some of the attacks. And I'll come back to to my point on the unity, if if you have that as part of your deterrence, that NATO or the EU or basically a group of countries is going to be united against a big problem like the crisis in Ukraine right now, or the aggression in Russia's aggression in Ukraine. This is the greatest deterrence, and we have been doing very well in that. Not only because we have stayed united, but we are adding more people, more countries to our deterrence.
I will take a question from the gentleman over there in a second, and while the microphone is on the way, Minister Pevkur, I'm very tempted to follow up with you and ask you about the cyber capabilities, but also a little bit about your thinking about the role of offensive cyber capabilities in deterrence.
Yes, I will just pick up very shortly about the global deterrence. First, I truly believe that what is happening at the moment in Ukraine affects directly also China-Taiwan conflict, directly. Because when the Chinese leadership or any other dictator will get the message that it is okay to go to your neighbor and take the territory of your neighbor, then this gives a signal that the free world has not managed to control Putin. So this is why the Ukraine conflict at the moment is so important also for the Chinese-Taiwan conflict. Now regarding the cyberspace, so we had a small discussion just a couple of hours ago, and I believe that this is something we don't acknowledge enough. Cyber is cyber is the sphere where we can say that it takes a lot of money, but you cannot take any political credit for that, because nobody sees where you put the money. When you buy a tank, everybody sees that you bought a tank. When you put 100 millions to cyber defense, then nobody understands where the money goes. So in that sense, it's just politically, it's very difficult to talk about the cyber resilience and cyber defense. But on the other hand, we all understand that when the Chinese companies have the capability or capacity to affect our energy, whatever they are, controllers at home, and they can switch on and switch off via these energy controllers your energy supply in your home, then we all understand that when there is a button in Beijing which can shut down the lights here in this forum, then we are in trouble. So in that sense, yes, we have to acknowledge the problems, and for that, the best solution is that when there is an understanding among the political leadership what that means to have also digital deterrence or the cyber defense, and what do you need to do. And this is just one part of the deterrence, and you cannot take away this. Although I said also in the previous discussion that what we have to understand that the military is operating in terms of 40 to 50 years. When you are buying some equipment, then it has to be operatable or operational for the next 40 years. So this makes a challenge for the digital sphere, because in digital sphere, after 2 years you have to change your iPhone and you buy the new one, because all the updates are not working anymore on the 2 years old iPhone. But it has to work on 20 years old howitzer. So this is the challenge what we face with the military hardware versus the software and IT.
Camille, you had a quick two-finger for the...
No, just to introduce a concept that I think is interesting in this conversation, which is the notion of integrated deterrence. Because what we do have is a situation where an attack in cyberspace or in outer space does tremendous damage to our ability to fight, to our societies, without being an armed attack in the traditional sense. So if we need to be able to deter those as well, which means monitoring cyberspace, monitoring outer space, and having some dedicated capabilities, because those are fighting domains that are recognized as such by NATO, but that are becoming increasingly important, because you could find ourselves, and Estonia has experienced that, on a major cyber attack that creates so much disruption on a country that it is something of the magnitude of what has been traditionally viewed as an armed attack.
The US national defense strategy is explicitly based on the concept of integrated deterrence, and probably actually the integrated deterrence was what did help in Ukraine with the way how Europeans were able to react by introducing sanctions, but also introducing other measures. But now I'm going to take the question from the gentleman in the second row. Please be brief and indicate who your question is addressed to.
Sure, thank you. My name is William Ostatnik. I'm from Bratislava, from ADAPT Institute, based here. The question has already been asked, essentially, but I would like to hear from three gentlemen. Procurement process and procurement in general. I mean, deterrence, more specifically, deterrence by denial really rests on the industrial capacity, on how we can restock, resupply, etc. In your views or view, what needs to happen, an overhaul of the procurement process in your respective EU countries? Thank you.
I'll actually ask this question to Thomas first.
Well, I'm not at the, I'm at the other side. I'm not at the acquisition part.
No, but you're the one
No, I know,
the user of the system.
Yeah, I know what you mean. At the moment, we focus very much to the customers to accelerate the process when how they can place an order. So in terms of government to government, single source, competition. The full story is, and then we measure this, that we say, okay, we need to procure faster. But I think relevant for NATO, for the military, is not how quickly we can place the order to industry to increase backlog. The question is how quickly we can deliver and deliver to the troops. That is the critical path. So I think it's a question to consider also capacity, industrial capacity. Are we well balanced? Do we see our supplier base? Are they broad enough? Do we look at the delivery terms and then to manage this? So
I would like to answer to that because I love this question. So
Go ahead.
I will give you maybe too long answer to that, but I really like this issue because I've been dealing with that topic inside of NATO already many times. First, just to understand that this is also the protectionism inside of Europe. Sorry to say that, but it's reality. So when we have 180 weapon systems in Europe and when we have 30 weapon systems in the United States Army, then we understand that, that how many different weapon systems do we have and how difficult it is to be interoperable. So, and definitely Ukrainians are doing great job now making all these weapon systems operational in Ukraine. But to come out from this, are we ready to say that, let's say in Nordic Europe, we are using for anti-tank missiles only Carl Gustaf M4? Are we ready for that? I believe we are not, because most of the countries and most of the industries would like to say that we have the better system, but that we are acquiring different systems. What we did in Estonia and Latvia, we now made a joint procurement for the medium-range air defense. Yes, it's only two countries, but it's an early bird, let's say this way. We did the same with HIMARS. We did the same with vehicles. So we are doing something. We did together with Poland the short-range air defense with Pioruns. So yes, we are doing something, but this is only two countries. We have to go to 20 countries. And then, but then we face the problem from the industry side, who will say that no, you cannot buy only one type of 155 millimeter howitzer, because we have Caesar, we have Susanna made here in Slovak Republic, we have Archer, we have FH-70. I can continue this list, and everybody is saying that I have the best system. And now when you have the procurement and say that, okay, let's agree in NATO that we will all buy anti-tank missiles, this one, and howitzers, this type. And then we have also not European production, let's say K9s from South Korea. So, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, at the end of the day, what we need to have inside of NATO is the standardization. This is definitely what we need, because also today, when I take this 155 millimeter howitzers, then we cannot use the same ammunition in different systems, weapon systems. So first, standardization, secondly, joint procurements, and thirdly, strong recommendations from the NATO headquarters to do at least regionally joint procurements. These are the three measures from my point of view.
I would add a fourth one, which is security of supply, that you pick a supplier which
Yeah, but
is
this
reachable
is
moving forward.
Yeah, but this is already, the task for the procurement details, that you will say that you need to have also the supply chain and all that. But first you have to come to the agreement that we will make a joint procurement, at least for 5 or 10 countries.
I really want to bring in Minister Sklenár now about your take on the same issue.
Well, I think Hanno is the best person to explain this from this point of view. I just wanted to add one thing, that the issue by the end of the day, we might call it security of supply, but it's the capacity of the industry. I mean, all these proposals, everything that goes into merging the orders and making them, more digestible for the industry, basically go into the direction of having the capacity that the production lines can produce the equipment, the ammunition, the tanks, what have you. So the investments into the industry, they just need to continue, and we need to find the best way to do that. Here again, a little bit of like an expert look. NATO and EU cooperation, where the requirements are set by the deterrence that we want to have in NATO, but then the EU has probably more ways and money to support that.
Camille, you seem to be disagreeing with what we're saying right now.
I don't necessarily disagree. I had the dubious privilege of chairing for many years the Committee on Standardization and the Conference of National Armament Directors at NATO, and seeing how it operates. So I share the frustration with a lot of what has been said about the fact that it is indeed a process which is too cumbersome and too slow, and where we need to work much more jointly together. What I would say is two things. First of all, I think the standardization issue, which seems to be the most boring topic, is one of the most important ones. Because at the end of the day, what is unacceptable is not that we have different guns, is the fact that the artillery shells that we're using cannot be put in each of these guns because we didn't do the homework of making them standard enough, not only by caliber, but by use, so that every artillery shell should be produced in NATO, should be used on any NATO gun that is available, and that should be an absolute requirement. And then, of course, allies can choose whatever weapon system they want, but that should be it should not be acceptable that the Caesar gun or the other one goes with its own series of artillery rounds. So the standardization, we need to push it much further than the current practice. I would agree, and I would certainly push for that. The second thing is, I think I very much support the idea of joint procurement. I think nations are indeed somewhat reluctant to go down that route, because national procurement, they often turns to national industries or preferred partnerships and things like that. And there, we should be doing much better and facilitating and encouraging multinational cooperation, even on smaller groups. It doesn't have to be every time at 31 or 32, but is of critical importance. And there, NATO and EU mechanism can help foster that and facilitate this conversation. I'm not sure we're going to move to a one-size-fits-all thing, but what I'm sure is that we can do much better. If you take something like the NH-90 helicopter, we had 17 versions for 13 nations participating in there, some of them being defined by the size of the king of the country, of a given country, which is not acceptable when you think of it. And I would argue, when you look at that, there are, we have to admit that something that is qualified by one ally or a handful of allies should necessarily be qualified. And there you have all the certification process. What we could do much better is it's not acceptable. We must and should do much better. Because that is, we are really not there in many of our bureaucracies when you speak to the national armament director.
But the last comment.
Right, I think we need to move on, so we'll get back to, okay, just 1 second. Okay.
Because, we were able somehow to agree in European Union that we have one charger for the mobile phone. So I hope that we can have the same understanding for the weapon systems.
You should do a calculation how much money we're going to be saving by merging at least some of the capability standards. But going back to Camille's points, and if we're talking about emerging technology, by the time we're going to write procurement contracts or procurement requirements, the technology will be outdated. So that's another level of speed and development of capabilities in procurement as well. But I want to bring in the gentleman over there for a question. Yeah. Could we please get the microphone there? Yeah.
There is one over there.
Minister Pevkur, the military, Eugene Chol, the Honorary Council of Ukraine in Montreal and president of NGO Ukraine 2050. The military failures of Russia in Ukraine is probably the best reason why they would never have attacked any NATO member country, which only highlights the tragic decision taken 15 years ago in Bucharest in not allowing Ukraine to access towards NATO, which would probably have prevented this genocidal war. That being said, what in your opinion can be done in the next summit in Lithuania to somehow alleviate that tragic decisions of 15 years ago?
And I want to build up on this question by integrating two of the questions that we have in the app. We seem to have a discussion between Charles Stanek and other people who are asking question anonymous, whether NATO membership of Ukraine is actually a deterrence or whether it would mean a World War III. Mr. Minister, you're first to answer.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. So first of all, definitely, you know the Estonian position that we welcome, of course, Ukraine in NATO as a NATO member. On the other hand, also, I fully acknowledge the understanding what was said by President Zelensky, that first we need to win this war, and this war has to be over. What we have to wait, or what we are have to push in Vilnius, is that there has to be a clear understanding what are the next steps for Ukraine. There has to be, well, I don't know exact wording at the moment of the communique, so it's still under the process of the drafting of the process. But what we have to have is the roadmap from Vilnius to Washington. What is the challenge for NATO and for Ukraine is that the next summit in Washington will be just before the US elections. So this will be a huge challenge for all of us, and that what will be the message coming out from Washington. So I would like to see that we will have a clear roadmap or clear step-by-step movement from Vilnius towards Washington, and it can be also linked to some other steps regarding the war and the process of the war. Can we end the war before that or not? But Ukraine needs the clear signal, because Bucharest is still there. 2008 decision is still there. That nobody takes away this, and now we all understand also on the political level that we cannot be on the same wording as we had in Bucharest. So let's see how it goes. Regarding the question that is Ukraine a cause of the new world war, or how it was said here, well, sorry to say, who initiated this war, Ukraine or Russia? And I really do not understand any discussions about that when somebody says that, oh, maybe we escalate with new weapon systems or fighters, jets or something, that we will escalate the war. Come on, who escalated the war? Who started the war? Was it, it's, and in that sense, every discussion regarding that because what Russia wants to achieve, the political goals, let's be honest, and these political goals of Russia have never changed. They want to have a gray zone between Russia and NATO. They want to have a control over this gray zone, and this is what they want to achieve. And they want to have some security guarantees for themselves. Sorry, this is not a free world. And this is what Ukraine is fighting for at the moment, that they are fighting for the free world and rule-based world. And this is why we support Ukraine. So this is obvious, and then this is why we can never accept this approach of Russia, looking at the international law.
We only have about 5 minutes before we have to wrap up, so each of you will only have 60 minutes for next answers. I will take a question from the gentleman over there, but before that, I really want to bring in Thomas. We're talking about the path of Ukraine to join NATO either now or in the future. There are some disagreements on the timeline and the timing of the next steps. What there seems to be an agreement on is that we need to keep providing the capabilities for Ukraine and make sure that Ukraine at least needs to defend itself. How does that factor in your business plan and especially industrial production to also make sure that Ukraine has access to the capabilities and potentially has also priority in the waiting lines?
It is a challenge for all industry to adapt or increase the capacity. We have shortage in labor. We have challenges on the supply chain. Of course, we need to provide further system and build this up. But industry can only react. This is nothing what goes from one day to another. This is something which need to be built up on a sustainable base. What is when we have delivered? What is coming next? And to prioritize, I mean, if you talk with other customers within NATO, also here's a great demand for ammunition. It's not only that we say Ukraine is short of ammunition. I think we have to have a critical view and say, okay, how to equip NATO, the NATO members, the modernization programs, and bring this in a very well coordinated and aligned process. Of course, we need to further supply Ukraine, and of course, Ukraine need to win this war. Our last comment, we talked about the eastern flank. We should not forget, there's not only an eastern flank. There's an Arctic flank, there's a southern flank, and maybe there's a western flank. Because 9/11, there was Article 5. So this is not only that we say, okay, we need to defeat, or Russia need to be defeated. It is an entire concept over 2 continents in the transatlantic context, what we are talking about. There's nothing which should change from one day to another. So,
yeah, you're absolutely right, and that goes back to our conversation on the broader conceptualization of deterrence. Very brief 5-second question from the gentleman up there, and indicate who you're addressing it to.
Yeah, this is Shota Guineria from the Baltic Defense College, and I wanted, since it's the last question, I wanted to bring it to the fundamental question and ask every panelist, what do you think we are actually trying to deter Russia from doing? Is it attacking NATO or destabilizing the Euro-Atlantic area and destruction of the European security architecture, because we need 2 different strategies for that, and I hope Ukraine made it very clear that deterring Russia from attacking NATO member states is not enough for keeping Euro-Atlantic area safe, secure, and stable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're a bit short on time, so I'll only take 2 people to answer this question, so the ones who didn't speak in the last answer, so Camille and then Minister Sklenár.
I think we need to recognize that the Russian attack of the 24th of February is a game changer for European security. Of course, I'm very much with the Ukrainians who say this whole thing started in 2014 from their perspective, but the reality is that by really tearing apart the key principles of the European security architecture that Russia had participated in establishing, we are in a different environment. And that is an environment that is not only an environment in which we have to deter an attack on NATO, which is core NATO business, but we have to also indeed think through what are under which conditions can we reestablish a security under which we create security for NATO members, for non-NATO members, and that those countries that are in the gray zones are free to make their own decisions for their security and are free to process and are not under a sort of constant threat. And there, the decisions by Sweden and Finland are great, but I'm also thinking about the Caucasus, Moldova, and of course Ukraine.
And Minister Sklenár, you have 50 seconds.
Thank you very much. That's an easy answer to this in 50 seconds. For me, the 2 things are a little bit different. I mean, if we talk about deterrence is as part of NATO. This is obviously about deterring Russia from attacking NATO countries. If we talk about deterring Russia from instigating, unrest in Europe or globally, because this is what it means, right? I mean, Ukraine has a global effect. For that, we need more than NATO. I mean, we need the rest of the world. So also the deterrence will necessarily look different. Not only what we discuss here as part of our NATO discussion. A very quick point on Ukraine's membership in NATO. Obviously, we are very strongly for that, and we will be working with them as they see fit to talk to us and work with us to get there once every stage of the accession is appropriate and done.
Thank you so much. We're going to have several sessions here discussing exactly this issue, how to bring Ukraine closer and what the timing would be. But for now, I would like to thank the panel here. Thank you so much for the insightful conversation. We will sure to reconnect with you again in the evening and tomorrow. And for now, I would like to ask also our Master of Ceremony, Kim Dotsir, to come back with us and wrap up the day for us.
Thank you so much. Let's thank the panel one more time. And I'm going to walk over this way so I can allow them to exit backstage as I wrap up. So for this first day, we have had prime ministers, presidents, and ministers. We've heard from the President of the European Parliament, the Vice President of the European Commission, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, and the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, among many other distinguished speakers. And of course, the conversation has been dominated by Ukraine. Everything from how to hold Putin accountable for war crimes to how Ukraine can join the European Union and how Ukraine can be rebuilt after the war, economically, politically, socially. We have also heard about disinformation and how democracies can both be threatened by it, because the freedom to share information means the freedom to share lies as well as truths. And following political parties, especially in a tribal place like the United States is becoming, means you can be divided by what your party says to believe versus what might actually be true. And unfortunately, that can apply to all sides of the divide. We've also talked about how to strengthen NATO and the eastern flank. And we heard from President Zuzana Kaputova, who stressed the importance of unity among the international community. And I quote, "We are far more resilient than we expected, and we are stronger than our opponents." She also said the war in Ukraine is something that must be won. And General Philip Breedlove, the former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, told us, "There's an important message people worldwide need to understand. Putin has weaponized rape, weaponized torture, weaponized murder, and weaponized taking children and deporting them back to Russia." On that somber note, a couple of housekeeping items to end the day. You will either be invited to a dinner right now, or if you're like me and the rest of us, we can go get dinner in the restaurant, buffet style. And there is a postprandial cocktail reception tonight in the hotel lobby at 9 p.m., but don't stay too late, because at 9 a.m. here and in the Maria Teresa stage, we will be back in session. Thank you so much.